When you think of the Mongol Empire, you think of this, the most feared army in history. But what if I told you their greatest weapon wasn't the sword or the bow? It was this, a piece of silver. This is the story of the money that conquered the world. For 150 years, the Mongol Empire was the most dominant force on the planet. From the shores of the Pacific to the heart of Europe, they commanded the largest contiguous land empire the world has ever known. We all know the stories of Genghis Khan, his brilliant tactics, and his unstoppable horsemen. But the story of what happened asterisk after asterisk the initial conquests is, in many ways, even more incredible. After Genghis Khan, his sons and grandsons inherited this vast, sprawling territory, and they faced a monumental challenge. How do you govern a dozen different cultures, speaking 100 different languages, spread across millions of square miles? Conquest is one thing, control is another. They could have ruled through fear and brute force alone, but they chose a different path. A smarter path. They decided to build an empire not just on military might, but on something far more lasting, wealth. The grandsons of Genghis Khan, leaders like Mongol Khan, didn't just want to rule the world, they wanted to own it. They took the Silk Road, that ancient network of dangerous trails, and transformed it. Under their rule, it became the safest and most prosperous superhighway for trade the world had ever seen. They created what was, in effect, the planet's first ever global free trade zone. But for a system like that to work, for merchants from Venice to trade with artisans in Beijing, you need one crucial thing: trust. And that's where our piece of silver comes in. This is the Mongol silver dirham. It might not look like much, but this coin was a revolution. Before the Mongols, trade was a chaotic mess. You'd have dozens of different currencies, all with varying weights and purities. A merchant could lose a fortune just by accepting the wrong coin. The Mongols swept all that away. They introduced this single, standardized currency across their entire empire. Each silver dirham was minted with a guaranteed high purity of silver. It didn't matter if you were in Persia, Russia, or China. A dirham was a dirham. Its value was reliable. This wasn't just money, it was a promise. A promise from the most powerful empire on earth that your business was safe, that your profits were secure. It was the ultimate expression of trust. This created an explosion of commerce. Merchants who once feared robbery and extortion could now travel thousands of miles under the protection of the Khan. They used a sophisticated passport system called a pesa, a golden tablet that granted them safe passage, supplies, and lodging anywhere in the empire. Think of it as a medieval ease pass for the Silk Road. With a trusted currency and guaranteed safety, trade boomed. Ideas, technologies, and cultures flowed freely alongside silks and spices. Gunpowder from China made its way to Europe, while Italian pasta may have been inspired by Chinese. Noodles brought back by traders like Marco Polo. The Mongol Empire became a global melting pot, connected by a river of silver. The Khans understood a profound economic truth. Wealth isn't just about what you can take, it's about what you can build. They established a sophisticated postal system, the yam, which could move messages and goods across the continent with astonishing speed. They were tolerant of different religions, understanding that merchants from different faiths brought new opportunities. They weren't just warriors. They were visionary CEOs of the largest corporation in the world, and the silver dirham was their primary tool. It funded their armies, built their cities, and enriched their subjects. This coin didn't just facilitate trade, it unified a fractured world under a single economic system. It was the glue that held the empire together, a silent conqueror more effective than any army. But empires, like the fortunes they are built on, are fragile. Power corrupts, and the very system that created such immense wealth also contained the seeds of its own destruction. The story of Mongol money doesn't end with this beautiful silver coin. It takes a much darker turn. The Mongols used this silver coin to build the richest empire on earth. But one of their own would soon use a different kind of money, a dark invention, to bring it all crashing down. A dark invention, a revolutionary idea that would poison the Mongol Empire from within. It was called paper money. Picture this: for centuries, wealth was something you could hold. It was heavy, it was shiny. Gold, silver, copper. Real tangible value. But Kublai Khan, the grandson of the legendary Genghis Khan, had a vision that was both brilliant and terrifyingly audacious. He looked at the vast empire his grandfather had built, an empire stretching from the Pacific to the Mediterranean, and saw a problem. Hauling all that metal around was slow, expensive, and dangerous. What if, he thought, what if we could replace it all with something lighter, something easier to control, something made of paper? In 1260, Kublai Khan established the Yuan dynasty in China and unleashed his grand experiment upon the world, the Chao, the first ever mass-produced government-backed paper currency. At first, it was a stroke of genius. Imagine the scene in the bustling capital of Dadu, what is now Beijing. Merchants could suddenly conduct huge deals without carts of silver. Trade boomed. The economy soared. The empire's treasury was centralized, giving Kublai unprecedented power to fund his grand projects. From magnificent cities to sprawling canals. To make sure everyone used it, Kublai made it the only legal tender. All gold and silver had to be turned into the government in exchange for these new paper notes. It seemed like he had unlocked an economic cheat code. Marco Polo, who visited during this time, was absolutely stunned. He wrote that the great Khan had perfected the art of alchemy, turning mere mulberry bark into something as valuable as gold. For a while, he was right. The system worked because people believed it would. They trusted that the government would honor the value printed on the paper. But power, especially the power to create money out of thin air, is a seductive thing. And Kublai Khan, like so many rulers after him, fell into its trap. He had expensive tastes and even more expensive ambitions. Wars needed to be funded. Palaces needed to be built. His court's lavish lifestyle didn't pay for itself. The solution seemed so simple: need more money. Just fire up the printing presses. The worry of those woodblock presses became the sound of the empire's beating heart. But it was a heart beating faster and faster, heading for a catastrophic failure. Initially, the extra printing was subtle. A few more notes here, a few more there. But soon, fiscal discipline went out the window. Kublai's successors continued the trend with even less restraint. Each new military campaign, each failed invasion, each extravagant project was paid for with freshly printed paper. The government was essentially writing checks it couldn't cash. There was no gold or silver backing up these ever-increasing mountains of paper. People started to notice. This is the moment the trust began to break. A farmer would sell his grain for a stack of chow notes, but when he went to the market the next day, that same stack of notes could only buy half a loaf of bread. prices started to skyrocket, not by the day, but by the hour. This wasn't just inflation. It was the world's first recorded case of hyperinflation. The value of the paper money was evaporating like mist in the morning sun. Imagine the chaos. Merchants started refusing to accept the worthless paper. They'd rather barter their goods or close their shops entirely. Warehouses overflowed with useless currency. Soldiers, paid in chow, found their wages couldn't even buy them food, leading to mutinies and desertions. The economic glue that held the vast, diverse Mongol Empire together had dissolved. The common people, who had been forced to trade their real gold and silver for these paper promises, were ruined. Famine, poverty, and desperation swept across the land. The mandate of heaven, the ancient Chinese concept that a dynasty's right to rule was granted by the gods, was clearly lost. The people saw the paper money not as a convenience, but as a state-sanctioned scam. The economic collapse triggered widespread social unrest and rebellion. The once mighty Yuan dynasty, which had seemed invincible, was hollowed out from the inside by its own creation. It couldn't fund its armies, it couldn't feed its people, it couldn't maintain control. The very tool designed to unify and strengthen the empire had become the poison that brought it to its knees. By 1368, less than a century after its grand inception, the Yuan dynasty collapsed, and the Mongols were driven out of China. Their great economic experiment had ended in a spectacular, world-altering disaster. The paper money experiment had failed, shattering the Mongol Empire's unity. But the idea of money from nothing did not die. It would re-emerge centuries later to create the most powerful and secretive financial empire in history. A system that traces its roots back to the failed experiment of a Mongol Khan. Welcome to the world of modern banking and fiat currency. If you've been with us for this journey, you've seen the rise and fall of the Mongol paper currency, the chow, an idea that seemed to conjure wealth from thin air, but ultimately crumbled under its own weight, leading to economic chaos. But as we hinted at, the idea of money from nothing was too powerful to simply disappear. It just went dormant, waiting for the right moment to re-emerge. And re-emerge it did, not in the steppes of Asia, but in the burgeoning financial centers of Europe. Fast forward a few centuries from the collapse of the Yuan dynasty. The world was changing. The Renaissance had sparked new ideas. Global trade was exploding, and the old systems of barter and precious metals were becoming cumbersome. Merchants and monarchs alike needed a more flexible, more efficient way to manage money. They needed something that could move at the speed of commerce. Enter the goldsmiths of 17th century London. These were the original bankers. People would deposit their gold and silver with them for safekeeping, and in return, they'd get a paper receipt. Think of it as a claim check for your gold. Soon, people realized it was much easier to just trade these paper receipts instead of lugging around heavy bags of coins. The receipts themselves started to become the money. Sound familiar? The goldsmiths then had a brilliant, and slightly audacious, realization. Not everyone was coming to claim their gold at the same time. Most of it just sat there, in their vaults. So, what if they issued more asterisk receipts than the gold they actually had? They could lend these extra receipts out and charge interest, making a profit on gold that didn't even exist. This was the birth of fractional reserve banking, the very foundation of our modern financial system. It was the Mongol chow, but with a clever twist. There was still a physical asset, gold, anchoring the system. even if the paper promises far exceeded it. This system evolved and became more sophisticated. Banks were established, and then central banks were created to manage the banks. For a long time, the world operated on the gold standard. This meant that a country's currency, like the British pound or the US dollar, had a fixed value in gold. You could, in theory, walk into a bank and exchange your paper money for a specific amount of gold. This provided a sense of stability and put a natural limit on how much money a government could print. You couldn't just print more money without acquiring more gold, but this system had its limits. During times of war or economic crisis, like the Great Depression, governments found the gold standard to be a straitjacket. They needed to spend more to stimulate the economy, to fund armies. Being tied to a limited supply of a yellow metal was incredibly restrictive. So, one by one, countries began to abandon the gold standard, giving their governments more control over the money supply. The final nail in the coffin came on August 15, 1971. In a move that shocked the world, U.S. President Richard Nixon announced that the United States would no longer convert U.S. dollars to gold at a fixed value. This event, known as the Nixon shock, effectively ended the gold standard for the entire world. From that day forward, the U.S. dollar, and by extension, most global currencies became pure fiat money. What is fiat money? It's a currency that a government has declared to be legal tender, but it is not backed by a physical commodity. Its value comes from the trust and confidence that people have in the government that issues it. It is, in essence, the exact same concept as Kublai Khan's Chow. It's a collective agreement, a shared belief that this piece of paper, or these digital numbers on a screen, have value. Think about it. That dollar bill in your pocket, or the balance in your bank account. ISNT, a claim on a piece of gold in a vault somewhere. It's a claim on, well, another dollar bill. Its value is derived entirely from the full faith and credit of the government. This gives central banks, like the U.S. Federal Reserve, an incredible power. The power to create money out of thin air. When the economy needs a boost, they can lower interest rates and print money digitally to inject into the financial system. When they need to cool things down and fight inflation, they can do the opposite. This gives them a powerful set of tools to manage the economy, to smooth out the booms and busts, and to respond to crises in a way that would have been impossible under a gold standard. The ability to print money allowed governments to fund everything from social programs to space exploration. It financed the modern world as we know it. But this power is a double-edged sword. It's the very same power that brought the Mongol Empire to its knees. If a government loses control, if it prints too much money to pay its debts or fund its promises, it can devalue the currency and trigger hyperinflation. We saw it in the Yuan dynasty. We saw it in Weimar Germany in the 1920s, in Zimbabwe in the 2000s, and more recently in places like Venezuela. A currency that is based only on trust can see that trust evaporate overnight, rendering people's life savings completely worthless. It also creates a system where a small, unelected group of central bankers holds immense sway over the economic fortunes of billions of people. Their decisions can determine who gets rich, who goes bankrupt, whether you can get a loan for a house, or if the price of your groceries goes up. It's a level of centralized power that would make even Kublai Khan blush. So, when we look back at the Mongol Empire, we often focus on the thundering hooves of their cavalry, the vastness of their conquests, and the brutality of their campaigns. But perhaps their most enduring, most dangerous, and most revolutionary legacy wasn't an army or a wall, it was an idea. The idea that money doesn't need to be a thing of inherent value. It can be a shared story, a social construct, a promise backed only by authority. From the mulberry bark paper of the Great Khan to the digital ledgers of the Federal Reserve, the concept of fiat currency has conquered the world more completely than any Mongol horde ever could. It is the invisible empire that controls our economies, shapes our societies, and dictates the financial reality of our daily lives. For better and for worse, we are all living in the financial world that the Mongols built. Thank you so much for joining us on this incredible journey through history and finance. If you've enjoyed exploring these hidden connections that shape our world, please consider hitting that subscribe button and turning on notifications. We have so many more stories to tell, and we'd love for you to be a part of our community. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.